We can now cover the authentication mechanisms associated with AWS S3. We'll start with the access key. To manage access for AWS applications, we have a central interface called IAM, or Identity Access Management. The system relies on users, associated roles, and granular permissions on buckets and functions like upload. Administrators create users, give them a role, and then assign permissions. These properties are stored at the account level. For third-party platforms like Automic, you can obtain a key made of two strings, the access key and the secret key. The next method is the AWS credentials file. These files are created on the AWS command line interface. This file contains individual sections, one for each profile, with an access key and access secret, which we described earlier. First, you create those profiles in IAM and generate the keys. Second, you generate the file in the CLI. You then store the file in the agent system and select the authentication method in the con object. You specify which profile should be sourced from the file and the location and name of the file itself. The next method is the AWS EC2 instance profile. EC2, or Elastic Compute Cloud, is an Amazon product that provides scalable computing capacity by deploying virtual systems. EC2 comes with a user interface to manage each of these systems called instances. You can create new ones, define system settings, set capacity based on individual needs, and so forth. This method is only relevant if your Automic integration agent is hosted in an EC2 instance. If your agent is installed on a regular server, the method is not applicable. You create the EC2 instance, then use IAM to make it available to other resources, for example, S3. In that case, you create an AWS identity, use the policy editor to enable access to, say, an S3 bucket, and then attach the policy to a role, which you need to create. You map the role to the policy and attach it to the EC2 instance. This means the role now has an EC2 instance profile of the same name, which you would add to the appropriate field in the connection object. The last method is external provider. This is appropriate for situations where access must be granted to third-party systems via single sign-on technology. Basically, you're trying to run everything through a single identity manager. Automic only supports Microsoft Azure and Entra. We covered important information in the video dedicated to Azure, and we recommend watching the segment on the service principal before considering this method. You will need the Azure tenant ID and the Entra URL, labeled Azure AD in the service principal form, say for Blob or Databricks. You will need the SAML username and password. SAML, or Security Assertion Markup Language, is an XML-based protocol to pass information about a user from an identity manager, in our case Microsoft Identity, to a service provider, in our case AWS. It's a bit like a passport. It contains standardized information, called an insertion in SAML technology, about a user, called the principal, as defined in the identity provider. This information is necessary to access resources over single sign-on. The process is rather lengthy and intricate, and we're not going to describe it here. AWS IAM needs to be integrated with Entra, accounts have to be created on both platforms, permissions are assigned, and a SAML connection needs to be established. Identity and service provider metadata needs to be downloaded to various XML files, and much more. However, the entire process should produce a principal ID for the user account created in AWS IAM, and this can be as simple as an email address. It also produces a password. You'll need to type both in the form. The procedure produces an ARN, or Amazon resource name, associated with the principal. For our purposes, this will contain a reference to the S3 bucket we want to access. Finally, it produces a role. We'll need to add both strings to the appropriate fields. Finally, we need to specify the identity provider, which is the Entra ID.